The scent of lilies made me nauseous. I'd always hated that smell, and now it would forever remind me of the worst day of my life. The funeral home's burgundy carpet felt sticky under my black heels as I walked toward the front row, clutching my purse so tight my knuckles had gone white. The memorial service for my husband David was about to begin, and I was barely holding myself together. That's when I saw her. Rebecca Martinez sat in my seat. Not just any seat, the widow's seat. The one reserved for the grieving spouse. She wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her perfectly styled auburn hair catching the dim light. She dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, playing the part of the heartbroken mistress to perfection. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. The nerve of this woman. After everything she put me through, after stealing my husband's attention for the last 2 years of his life, she had the audacity to sit in my chair at his memorial service. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The funeral director, Mr. Patterson, looked up from his clipboard with sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry for your loss. Is everything all right?" I pointed toward Rebecca with a trembling finger. "That woman is sitting in my seat." Mr. Patterson's face flushed red. He'd clearly been dreading this moment. "Ma'am, there seems to be some confusion about the arrangements. Miss Martinez insisted she had the right to sit there, and she presented some documentation." "Documentation?" My voice cracked. "I'm his wife. I've been his wife for 15 years. The whispers started then. I could feel the eyes of David's colleagues, our neighbors, his family members all turning toward us. The very people who should have been supporting me in my grief were now watching this humiliating spectacle unfold. Rebecca turned around slowly, her green eyes meeting mine with a mixture of defiance and what looked almost like pity. "Elena," she said softly, "I know this is difficult, but David made his wishes very clear. Perhaps you should speak with Mr. Williams." Mr. Williams. David's lawyer. I hadn't seen him yet, but Rebecca's mention of him sent ice through my veins. What kind of documentation could she possibly have? Chapter 1, The Perfect Storm. I'd met Rebecca Martinez exactly 18 months ago at David's company Christmas party. She was the new marketing director, brilliant, beautiful, and 15 years younger than my 42 years. I remember watching her laugh at David's terrible jokes that night, the way her hand lingered on his arm just a moment too long when she congratulated him on his latest promotion. "She's trouble," I'd whispered to David on the drive home, the city lights blurring through our windshield. Snow was beginning to fall, coating everything in a deceptive layer of purity. "Who, Rebecca?" "Elena, don't be ridiculous. She's just being friendly. It's called networking." David had laughed it off, but something in his voice was different. Lighter. Happier than he'd sounded in months. I should have trusted my instincts. The signs were all there, like breadcrumbs leading to our destruction. The late nights at the office that started becoming regular. The new cologne, something expensive and musky that made me feel dizzy when I caught whiffs of it on his shirts. The way he'd angle his phone away from me when texting, his fingers moving quickly across the screen with an urgency he'd never shown for my messages. David was a creature of habit. He'd worn the same style of khakis and polo shirts for the entire 15 years of our marriage. His idea of dressing up was adding a belt. But suddenly, he was shopping for fitted jeans and button-down shirts that actually complemented his tall, lean frame. "You look good," I told him one morning as he got ready for work, genuinely meaning it. He'd lost 20 pounds and seemed to carry himself differently. More confident. His shoulders were straighter, his smile quicker. "What's gotten into you?" "Thanks," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Just trying to take better care of myself." Maybe we both should. The comment stung, though I tried not to show it. I'd gained weight over the years, 15 pounds that had settled around my hips and stayed there like unwelcome guests. But David had never seemed to mind before. He'd always said he loved my curves, that I was beautiful exactly as I was. Now I wondered if he'd been lying all along. The first real crack in our marriage had actually started months before Rebecca arrived. David had been passed over for a promotion he'd been working toward for 3 years. The disappointment hit him hard, and he'd started questioning everything about his life. His career, his choices, his happiness. I'm 57 years old, Elena, he'd said one night over dinner, pushing his food around his plate without eating. What do I have to show for it? A middle management position, a mortgage I'll be paying until I'm 70, and a marriage that feels more like a business partnership than a romance. That's not fair, I'd replied, setting down my fork harder than necessary. We have a good life, David. A stable life. Isn't that worth something? Stable. He'd said the word like it tasted bitter. When did stable become enough? When did we stop wanting more? More what? More drama? More uncertainty? More problems? More passion, Elena. More excitement. More feeling like we're actually alive instead of just going through the motions. That conversation haunted me for weeks. I started paying attention to our routine in a way I never had before. We woke up at the same time every day, drank our coffee while reading our respective sections of the newspaper, kissed goodbye without really looking at each other. We came home, made dinner, watched television, went to bed. Rinse and repeat. When had we become this? When had we stopped talking about dreams and started only discussing logistics? I tried to inject some spontaneity into our relationship. I planned surprise date nights, bought new lingerie, suggested weekend getaways. But David seemed distracted, like he was physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely. Then Rebecca arrived, and suddenly David was full of life again. Just not with me. The confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. I decided to surprise David at the office with his favorite Thai takeout. We used to do that when we were younger, surprise each other with little gestures. I thought maybe if I made an effort, I could win back whatever I was losing. I used my key card to get into his building, the security guard waving me through with a friendly smile. Evening, Mrs. Chen. David's lucky to have you looking out for him. If only he knew. I took the elevator to the 14th floor, balancing the warm containers of pad thai and green curry. The familiar smell of the building, industrial carpet and recycled air, usually comforted me. Tonight it made me nervous. David's corner office was at the end of the hall, and I could see the light was still on. As I got closer, I heard voices. His voice. And hers. I can't keep doing this, Rebecca. Elena doesn't deserve this. But you're not happy with her, David. You said so yourself. When's the last time she really understood you? When's the last time you felt alive with her? I pressed myself against the wall outside his office, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it. The Thai food was getting cold in my hands, the plastic containers suddenly feeling like they weighed 100 pounds. It's not that simple. We have a life together. A house. 15 years of history. History isn't love, David. What we have, this connection, it's real. It's what you've been missing. I heard footsteps moving across his office floor, and then silence. The kind of silence that spoke volumes. The kind of silence that meant they were touching, kissing, doing things that should have been reserved for his wife. I set the food down quietly on the floor and walked back to the elevator, my whole body numb. In the lobby, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to process what I'd just heard. When I finally drove home, I threw the Thai food in the garbage and told David the first wasn't feeling well when he asked about dinner. That night, David came home at his usual time with his usual excuse about a client meeting. I served him leftover casserole and watched him eat while I picked at my own food, studying his face for any sign of guilt. But David had always been good at compartmentalizing. It's what made him such a successful financial advisor. How was your day? He asked, like he did every night. Fine, I lied, like I was learning to do. Over the next few weeks, I became an expert at pretending everything was normal while dying inside. I smiled when he complimented my cooking. I nodded when he talked about work projects that probably involved Rebecca. I made love to him when he reached for me in bed, all while knowing he was thinking of someone else. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was the loneliness. I was living with my husband of 15 years, and I'd never felt more alone in my life. 3 months later, I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds, desperate, pathetic, like something out of a bad movie. But I needed proof. I needed to know for certain what I already knew in my heart. The photos arrived in a manila envelope on a Thursday. David and Rebecca at a restaurant downtown, holding hands across the table like teenagers. David and Rebecca entering a hotel room, his hand on the small of her back. David and Rebecca kissing in the parking garage of his office building, her fingers tangled in his hair. The timestamp showed this had been going on for months. But it was the last photo that broke me. David and Rebecca at a jewelry store, him slipping what looked like an engagement ring onto her finger. My husband of 15 years was planning to leave me for a woman who could have been our daughter. I confronted him that same night. I'll never forget the look on his face when I spread the photos across our kitchen table like a deck of cards. Shock, then guilt, then something that looked almost like relief. Elena, don't. I held up my hand, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Just don't lie to me anymore. I can't take any more lies. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me, suddenly looking every one of his 57 years. The confident man who'd been strutting around in new clothes and expensive cologne was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and small. I didn't plan for this to happen. But it did happen. And you let it keep happening. Every day, for months, you made the choice to keep betraying me. I love her. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'm sorry, Elena. I never wanted to hurt you, but I love her. And me? What about me, David? What about us? What about 15 years of marriage and all the promises we made? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photos spread between us. I love you too. But it's different. It's comfortable. Safe. With Rebecca, I feel like the man I used to be. The man I wanted to be. Comfortable. Safe. 15 years of marriage reduced to those two words. So what now? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded when everything inside me was crumbling. I don't know. I need time to figure this out. But time, as it turned out, was something we didn't have. Chapter 2, The Unraveling. David had his first heart attack 3 weeks later. Massive coronary, the doctors said. Stress-related. He survived that one, spent 4 days in the ICU with me holding his hand, whispering promises about counseling and second chances and fighting for our marriage. Rebecca didn't visit him in the hospital. I thought that meant something. I thought maybe this health scare had put things in perspective for him. I was wrong. During his recovery, David seemed different. Softer, somehow. More like the man I'd married. He thanked me for taking care of him, for fielding phone calls from work, for bringing him books and magazines to pass the time. He held my hand while we watched television, and for a few precious weeks, I thought we might actually make it through this. I've been thinking, he said one evening as I fluffed his pillows, about what the doctor said. About stress and lifestyle changes. Maybe this is a wake-up call. What kind of wake-up call? Maybe I need to remember what's really important. Family. Marriage. The life we built together. My heart soared. This was what I'd been praying for, a sign that our marriage was worth fighting for, that David was ready to let go of his midlife crisis and come home to me emotionally. But David was a master of saying what he thought people wanted to hear. 2 weeks after he returned to work, I found a credit card statement that showed charges for a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. A weekend when David had told me he was attending a financial conference in Sacramento. A weekend when Rebecca had also been mysteriously absent from her social media accounts. I sat on our bed, staring at the charges for a luxury hotel, expensive dinners, couples massage packages. While I'd been nursing him back to health, planning our reconciliation, David had been planning a romantic weekend with his mistress. That night, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I went through David's phone while he was sleeping. The text messages between David and Rebecca told a story that made my stomach turn. She'd been angry that he hadn't left me immediately after the heart attack. She felt he was stringing her along, wasting her time. The Napa weekend was supposed to be his way of proving his commitment to her. I can't keep waiting forever, David. I'm 34 years old. I want marriage, children, a real life. Not this secret affair bullshit. I know, baby. After Elena and I separate, we can start planning our future. I promise. You've been promising for months. When are you actually going to file the papers? Soon. I just need to find the right time. She's been so good to me during my recovery. I can't just abandon her right now. You're not abandoning her. You're choosing happiness. You're choosing us. I know. You're right. I love you, Rebecca. This is just complicated. It doesn't have to be complicated. File for divorce. Move in with me. Let's start our life together. What about the house? The assets? Elena will take me for everything. Then we'll be smart about it. There are ways to protect what's yours. Reading those messages felt like drowning. David wasn't just having an affair, he was planning a whole new life without me. And Rebecca wasn't just the other woman, she was actively strategizing how to minimize my claim to the life David and I had built together. I took screenshots of everything and emailed them to myself. Then I carefully put David's phone back where I'd found it and lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling and planning my next move. The second heart attack came 6 months later, while he was at Rebecca's apartment. She called 911, rode with him in the ambulance, held his hand as he died. I got a call from the hospital at 2:47 a.m., asking me to come identify my husband's body. The woman at the information desk looked confused when I arrived. "Are you family?" "I'm his wife." "Oh." She glanced at her computer screen, then back at me. "There was another woman here earlier who said." "I'm his wife," I repeated firmly. "Elena Chen. We've been married 15 years. She directed me to the right floor, where a doctor with kind eyes and tired scrubs explained what had happened. Massive heart attack. Nothing they could do. He was pronounced dead at 2:23 a.m. Was he alone?" I asked. The doctor glanced at his chart. "No, there was a young woman with him. Miss Martinez. She's listed as his emergency contact." Emergency contact. She'd replaced me as his emergency contact. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, phone calls, and paperwork. Rebecca involved herself in every decision, acting like she had the right to plan David's memorial service. She chose the flowers, lilies, which David had always hated, the music, hymns from a church he'd never attended, and even the funeral home. David would have wanted something elegant, she told Mr. Patterson, the funeral director, while I stood there feeling invisible. Something that reflected his sophisticated tastes. David's sophisticated tastes? The man who thought Olive Garden was fine dining and whose idea of culture was watching the History Channel? But I was too grief-stricken and confused to fight her. I let her make the arrangements while I tried to process the fact that my husband was gone, that our last conversation had been about taking out the trash, that I'd never get the chance to either forgive him or demand the apology I deserved. Now, standing in the funeral home looking at Rebecca in my seat, I understood. She hadn't just taken my husband. She'd somehow positioned herself as his next of kin, his primary mourner, his widow in everything but law. "Mrs. Chen?" Mr. Patterson touched my arm gently. "Would you like me to find you another seat? Perhaps in the second row?" The second row. At my own husband's funeral. "No," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I think I need to speak with Mr. Williams first." Chapter 3, The Truth Unveiled. I spotted David's lawyer near the back of the room, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and a nervous expression. He'd been avoiding eye contact with me since I arrived, which should have been my first clue that something was very wrong. "Harold," I called out, making my way through the clusters of mourners. "We need to talk." Harold Williams had been David's lawyer for over a decade. He'd handled our house purchase, written our wills, helped us set up our retirement accounts. He knew me. He knew our marriage. So why did he look like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world? "Elena, I'm so sorry for your loss. David was a good man." "Harold, what's going on? That woman is sitting in my seat, claiming she has documentation." "What documentation?" Harold glanced around nervously, then guided me toward a quiet corner near the coat closet. The smell of mothballs and old wool made my nose wrinkle. "Elena, I think we should discuss this privately. After the service. There are some complications with David's estate." "What kind of complications?" "He made some changes to his will. Recent changes. And there are some other legal documents that, well, they affect your status as his primary beneficiary." My blood turned to ice. The room suddenly felt too hot, too crowded, too full of whispers and pitying looks. What are you talking about? David filed for divorce, Elena. 6 weeks ago. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped Harold's arm to keep from falling, my fingernails digging into his suit jacket. That's impossible. I never received any papers. I never signed anything. The papers were served to your house. David said you'd been avoiding service, so he petitioned the court for alternative service. The notice was published in the legal section of the newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks. I felt like I was drowning, like the air in the room had suddenly become too thick to breathe. I don't read the legal section of the newspaper, Harold. Nobody reads the legal section of the newspaper. I'm sorry, Elena. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks ago. Legally, you're no longer married to David. The room spun around me. I wasn't David's widow. I was his ex-wife. Everything I thought I knew, everything I thought I was entitled to, had been stripped away while I wasn't paying attention. But the house goes to Rebecca. David transferred the deed to her name 3 months ago. The life insurance. Rebecca is listed as the primary beneficiary. His retirement accounts. Rebecca. Everything. She'd gotten everything. I looked across the room at Rebecca, who was now standing and accepting condolences from David's colleagues like she was the grieving widow. Like she belonged there. Like she had every right to be there. Because legally, she did. This can't be happening, I whispered. Harold, you've known David for years. You know he wouldn't do this without telling me. You know he wouldn't just abandon me like this. Harold's expression was pained. Elena, I advised against the alternative service. I told David he should handle this face-to-face with you. But he said you were in denial about the state of your marriage, that you were making the divorce proceedings difficult by refusing to acknowledge them. I never refused anything. I never even knew there were divorce proceedings. According to the court documents, David tried multiple times to serve you personally, but you were never home. He said you were staying with friends, avoiding him. I stared at Harold in disbelief. I was never staying with friends. I was home every night. David was the one who was never home. Something flickered in Harold's eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or confusion. Harold, I said urgently, think about this. You've known me for 10 years. Do I seem like the kind of person who would hide from divorce papers? Do I seem like someone who's in denial about her marriage falling apart? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him thinking, reassessing. There's something else, he said finally. Something I've been uncomfortable about from the beginning. The divorce papers. David's signature looked different. Not dramatically different, but off somehow. I mentioned it to him, and he said he'd been stressed, that his handwriting had been affected by the heart medication. My pulse quickened. Harold, what if David didn't sign those papers? Elena, that's a serious accusation. What if Rebecca forged his signature? Harold looked genuinely shaken now. That would be fraud. Identity theft. That would mean the divorce was never legal. That would mean I'm still his wife. That would mean everything she's claimed belongs to me. The funeral director announced that the service was about to begin. People started moving toward their seats. I watched Rebecca settle into what should have been my chair, smoothing her dress and checking her phone one last time. She looked so confident, so secure in her position. But I was starting to realize that confidence might be built on a foundation of lies. Harold, I said quietly, I need you to get me copies of those divorce papers. All of them. Tonight. Elena, I can't just. Yes, you can. Because if I'm right, if she forged those documents, then she's committed multiple felonies. And you, as David's lawyer, have a responsibility to protect his estate from fraud. Harold nodded slowly. Meet me at my office after the service. We'll go through everything. I should have left then. I should have walked out of that funeral home and never looked back. What was the point of staying for the memorial service of a man who'd erased me from his life so completely? But something kept me rooted to that spot. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the growing suspicion that David hadn't erased me at all. Maybe Rebecca had done it for him. I found a seat in the third row, behind David's colleagues and distant relatives who barely knew me. The service began with a hymn that David had never liked, chosen by a woman who'd known him for 2 years instead of the woman who'd known him for nearly 2 decades. Rebecca gave the first eulogy. She talked about David's passion for life, his sense of adventure, his dreams of traveling the world. She painted a picture of a man I barely recognized, spontaneous, romantic, free-spirited. David taught me that it's never too late to chase your dreams, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. He showed me what it meant to live authentically, to follow your heart even when it's difficult. He was planning to propose to me next month. The audience murmured sympathetically. I felt sick. But as I listened to Rebecca's eulogy, something bothered me. She kept mentioning things that didn't sound like David at all. Dreams of opening a wine bar in Tuscany. Plans to learn to sail. A desire to write a novel. David hated wine. He got seasick on pontoon boats. The most creative writing he'd ever done was grocery lists. Either Rebecca was making these things up, or she'd confused David with someone else entirely. David's brother Marcus spoke next, sharing memories from their childhood. Then came David's boss, praising his work ethic and dedication. Each speaker painted David as this wonderful, vibrant man who'd been taken too soon. None of them mentioned his wife of 15 years. When the service ended, people filed out slowly, stopping to offer Rebecca their condolences. I watched her accept their sympathy with grace, playing the part of the bereaved almost fiancé perfectly. I was gathering my purse to leave when Harold Williams approached me again. Elena, we really do need to talk. About the divorce settlement, the division of assets. There are some things you need to see. Like what? Harold looked around to make sure no one was listening. Like the fact that David's signature on the final divorce decree doesn't match his signature on any of the other documents in his file. Not even close. My heart started beating faster. What are you saying? I'm saying someone may have forged David's signature on the divorce documents. Which would mean the divorce was never legally finalized. Which would mean I'm still his wife. Harold nodded gravely. And if that's the case, then Rebecca Martinez has no legal claim to any of David's assets. Everything would go to you, as his widow. I looked back across the room at Rebecca, who was still accepting condolences from the last few mourners. She caught my eye and smiled, a small, satisfied smile that made my blood boil. She'd forged David's signature. She'd stolen my marriage, my home, my financial security, and my right to grieve my husband properly. She'd tried to erase me completely. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how well I knew my husband's handwriting. Chapter 4, Justice and Redemption. Harold's office was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer who'd been practicing for 30 years, dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco even though Harold had quit smoking a decade ago. He spread David's legal documents across his conference table like pieces of a puzzle. Look at this, Harold said, pointing to David's signature on our mortgage documents from 5 years ago. Then he showed me his signature on his will from 2 years ago. Finally, he showed me the signature on the divorce papers. Even to my untrained eye, the differences were obvious. David had always signed his name with a distinctive loop and a slight flourish at the end. The signature on the divorce papers was close, but not quite right. The loop was wrong, and the flourish was missing entirely. Rebecca had access to David's signature, I said, thinking out loud. She worked with him. She would have seen him sign documents, expense reports, contracts. It's a good forgery, Harold admitted. Good enough to fool a busy court clerk. But not good enough to fool someone who knew David well. What do we do now? Now we call the police. The investigation moved quickly once Harold presented the evidence. A handwriting expert confirmed what we already knew, the signature on the divorce papers was a forgery. Rebecca Martinez was arrested 3 days later on charges of forgery, fraud, and identity theft. The local news picked up the story, woman poses as widow, steals inheritance. It turned out Rebecca had been planning this for months. She'd researched the divorce process, learned about alternative service requirements, and even paid to have fake legal notices published in the newspaper. She'd been so confident in her scheme that she'd already transferred David's assets into her own name and was planning to sell our house within the month. But she'd underestimated David's inability to completely let go of our marriage. And she'd underestimated me. The real shock came when the police searched Rebecca's apartment and found a folder labeled "The Plan." Inside were detailed notes about David's financial assets, photocopies of his signature from various documents, and even research into how long she'd need to wait after his death before she could remarry without suspicion. She'd been planning to kill him. The heart medication found in her medicine cabinet wasn't prescribed to her. It was a powerful drug that could cause cardiac arrest in someone with David's existing heart condition. The medical examiner re-examined David's body and found traces of the drug in his system. Rebecca hadn't just forged David's signature and stolen his assets. She'd murdered him. She was charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I moved back into my house, 2 weeks after her arrest. Everything looked exactly the same, but it felt different. The walls that had once felt like a prison of routine and complacency now felt like a sanctuary. This was my home. These were my memories. This was my life, and no one could take it away from me again. I found David's coffee mug in the dishwasher, still dirty from the last morning he'd used it. Instead of washing it, I left it there for a few days. Some things were worth preserving exactly as they were. But eventually, I realized that keeping it dirty wasn't honoring David's memory, it was keeping me stuck in the past. The life insurance money allowed me to quit my job at the accounting firm where I'd been slowly dying of boredom for 8 years. I'd always wanted to go back to school, to finish the art degree I'd abandoned when I got married. At 42, I figured it was now or never. I enrolled in painting classes at the community college. The professor, a woman named Patricia with paint-stained fingers and wild gray hair, looked at my first attempt, a shaky landscape that looked like it was painted by a nervous 10-year-old, and smiled. "You've got good instincts," she said. "You just need to trust yourself more." Trust myself more. When was the last time I trusted myself about anything important? I started painting David. Not as he was at the end, tired, guilty, distracted, but as he was when we first met. Young and confident and full of possibilities. I painted him laughing at something I'd said, the way he used to before Rebecca came along and made all my jokes seem stale. It was therapeutic, in a way. Each brush stroke was a memory, each color a feeling I'd been too afraid to acknowledge while he was alive. I painted my anger, my grief, my love, and yes, my relief. Because if I was being honest with myself, I was relieved that I didn't have to fight for him anymore. The investigation had revealed something else that gave me peace. David had never actually planned to marry Rebecca. In his phone, which the police had recovered, were text messages showing that he'd been trying to end things with her for weeks before his death. "Rebecca, this has gone too far. I can't leave Elena. I won't leave her. You promised me. You said we'd be together." I was confused. I made a mistake. A big mistake. Elena is my wife, and she's going to stay my wife. You're just scared. Once you file the divorce papers, you'll see how much better life can be. I'm not filing divorce papers. I'm not leaving my wife for you. This is over, Rebecca. No, David. This is just the beginning. Those messages were sent the day before David's death. Rebecca had killed him not because he was planning to leave me, but because he was planning to stay with me. 6 months after David's death, I had my first art show. It was just a small exhibition at the community center, but people came. They looked at my paintings and saw something worth looking at. Marcus, David's brother, came to the opening. He stood in front of a painting I'd titled "The Last Dance," David and me at our wedding, young and hopeful and completely naive about what lay ahead. "He would have been proud of you," Marcus said quietly. "Would he?" "Elena, David made a lot of mistakes in his last few years. But he never stopped caring about you. The police showed me those final text messages. He was coming home to you. He was going to fight for your marriage." I nodded, but I didn't say what I was thinking, that it had taken the threat of losing me to make David realize what he had. Sometimes it's too late for second chances. The biggest surprise came at the end of the evening. A woman I didn't recognize approached me, elegant and well-dressed, probably in her 70s. Mrs. Chen? I'm Margaret Williams, Harold's wife. I recognized her then. I'd met her briefly at a few social functions over the years. I wanted to thank you, she continued. Thank me? For what? For handling this situation with such grace. Harold told me what that woman put you through, how she tried to steal your identity as David's wife. A lesser person would have sought revenge. Who says I didn't? Margaret smiled. Living well is the best revenge, don't you think? Look at you now, pursuing your art, building a new life. You've turned tragedy into triumph. As I drove home that night, I thought about Margaret's words. Had I turned tragedy into triumph? Or had I simply survived something that could have destroyed me? Maybe it was both. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. Our house. The place where David and I had been happy, where we'd been unhappy, where we'd built a life that wasn't perfect but was ours. Inside the house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table where David and I used to eat breakfast together every morning for 15 years. The same table where I confronted him with those photos of his affair. The same table where Harold had first told me about the divorce papers that never should have existed. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to my sister Sarah, who'd been checking on me constantly since David's death. Subject: New Beginnings. Dear Sarah, you asked me a few weeks ago if I was ready to start dating again. At the time, I thought you were crazy. It's only been 8 months since David died, and I couldn't imagine wanting to share my life with someone else again. But something's changed. I'm not the same woman I was when I was married to David. That woman was comfortable, safe, maybe a little bit afraid of taking risks. This woman, the woman I am now, she's braver. She's willing to trust herself. She's not afraid of being alone, which means she's not desperate for company. So yes, I think I might be ready. Not to replace David, but to add a new chapter to my story. One that I get to write myself this time. The trial starts next month. Rebecca's lawyers are trying to plea bargain, but the prosecutor says they have an airtight case. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison, and honestly, I feel nothing about that. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even pity. She tried to erase me from existence, and she failed. That's all that matters. I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately. People keep asking if I've forgiven David for the affair, for the lies, for almost destroying our marriage. The truth is, forgiveness isn't something you do once and then you're done. It's something you choose every day. Some days I forgive him. Some days I'm still angry. Some days I miss him so much I can barely breathe. Some days I'm grateful he's gone because I don't have to wonder anymore if he's thinking about another woman when he kisses me goodnight. But every day, I choose to forgive myself. For not seeing the signs sooner. For not fighting harder for our marriage. For sometimes feeling relieved that I don't have to compete for my husband's attention anymore. Patricia, my art professor, says that pain is just love with nowhere to go. I think she's right. All the love I had for David, all the love I still have for the good parts of our marriage, I'm learning to redirect it toward myself. I'm painting again. Really painting, not just taking classes. I have a piece in a gallery downtown next month, my first real showing. It's a self-portrait, but not the kind you might expect. It's me at 42, standing in my kitchen, making coffee for one. I'm wearing David's old Cornell sweatshirt, my hair is messy, and I'm smiling. The title is Finally Free. I know that sounds harsh, talking about freedom when my husband is dead. But the truth is, I was in prison long before David died. I was trapped by my own fears, my own willingness to settle for less than I deserved. David's affair, Rebecca's schemes, even David's death, they didn't free me. I freed myself. Yesterday, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I signed up for a singles hiking group. Not because I'm desperate to meet someone, but because I want to climb mountains. Literally. I want to see how high I can go when the only person I have to keep up with is myself. The first hike is this weekend. Mount Washington. I've never climbed anything higher than the stairs to our second floor, but I bought hiking boots and everything. If I die on that mountain, at least I'll die doing something I chose to do, not something I felt obligated to do. I'm rambling. I do that now, Ramble. When you spend 15 years editing yourself for someone else's comfort, it takes a while to remember how to speak freely. David left me a letter, you know. Harold gave it to me after the whole forgery thing was sorted out. David had written it months before he died, probably when he was trying to decide whether to leave me for Rebecca. In it, he said I was his first love, his longest love, and his truest love. He said Rebecca made him feel young, but I made him feel like home. I cried when I read that letter. Not because it was romantic, it wasn't. It was too little, too late. I cried because it made me realize that I'd spent 15 years trying to be David's home, and I'd forgotten how to be my own home. I'm learning now. How to make coffee just the way I like it, not the way David liked it. How to watch romantic comedies without apologizing for my silly taste in movies. How to eat ice cream for dinner if that's what I want. How to take up space in my own life. The house feels different now. Bigger, somehow. It's like David's disappointment and restlessness have been filling up all the corners, and now that it's gone, there's room for me to expand. I moved his office into the garage and turned it into an art studio. The north-facing window has perfect light for painting. I miss him sometimes. Not the man he became in his last years, but the man he was when we were young. The man who used to leave me little notes in my lunch bag when I worked at the bank. The man who danced with me in our kitchen when our favorite song came on the radio. The man who held my hand during my father's funeral and didn't let go for 3 hours. That man deserved to be mourned. That man deserved to be remembered. That man was worth 15 years of my life. But the man who lied to me for 2 years, who planned to abandon me for a younger woman, who was too cowardly to end our marriage honestly, that man doesn't deserve any more of my tears. I'm done crying, Sarah. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I'm done making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. Rebecca Martinez tried to steal my life, and she almost succeeded. But here's what she didn't understand: you can't steal someone's life if they're not really living it in the first place. I wasn't living, Sarah. I was just existing, just going through the motions of being Elena Chen, David's wife. Now I'm learning how to be Elena Chen, period. Elena Chen, artist. Elena Chen, mountain climber. Elena Chen, woman who makes her own choices and lives with the consequences. It's terrifying and exhilarating and sometimes lonely, but it's mine. Every mistake, every triumph, every quiet morning drinking coffee in my kitchen, it's all mine. So to answer your question, yes, I might be ready to start dating again. But not because I need someone to complete me. I'm already complete. I might be ready to share my completeness with someone who's equally complete on their own. Someone who won't ask me to make myself smaller. Someone who won't expect me to be comfortable and safe and predictable. Someone who will encourage me to climb mountains, literal and metaphorical. If that person exists, wonderful. If not, that's wonderful too. Because I've learned the most important lesson of all: I'm enough. Just me, by myself, in my house, with my art and my coffee and my dreams, I'm enough. Love always. Elena. P.S. But if you set me up with another divorced accountant who thinks Applebee's is fine dining, I'm disowning you as a sister. I hit send and closed the laptop. Tomorrow, I had my hiking boots to break in. Next week, I was starting an advanced painting class. Next month, my first gallery showing. I was 42 years old, and I was just getting started. The last thing I did before going to bed was something I'd started doing every night since moving back into the house. I walked through each room, turning off lights and checking locks, but also just appreciating it. This was my space. My sanctuary. My home. In the kitchen, I ran my hand along the counter where David used to leave his keys. In the living room, I fluffed the pillows on the couch where we used to watch television together. In the bedroom, I smoothed the comforter on the bed where I now slept diagonally, taking up as much space as I wanted. But it was in my new art studio, David's former office, where I lingered the longest. My easel stood in front of the window, holding my latest painting, a landscape of Mount Washington, the mountain I was going to climb this weekend. I'd painted it from a photograph, but soon I'd paint it from memory, from experience. On the wall behind my easel, I'd hung 3 paintings. The first was the self-portrait I'd told Sarah about, me in the kitchen, finally free. The second was the wedding painting Marcus had seen at my art show, young David and Elena, full of hope and naive optimism. The third was new, still drying. It was David as I'd last seen him, in his hospital bed after his first heart attack. But in my painting, he wasn't just lying there waiting to recover so he could go back to his affair. In my painting, he was reaching toward something just outside the frame. Reaching toward redemption, maybe. Or absolution. Or just peace. I'd titled it Too Late. Because that's what I'd finally accepted. It was too late for David to make things right between us. Too late for him to choose our marriage over his midlife crisis. Too late for us to grow old together, to figure out what came after all those years of comfortable routine. But it wasn't too late for me. Standing in my studio, surrounded by canvases covered in my dreams and memories and pain transformed into something beautiful, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, exactly, but something deeper. Contentment. Wholeness. The knowledge that whatever came next, I could handle it. Because I'd already survived the worst thing that could happen to me. My husband had betrayed me, abandoned me, and died before we could resolve anything. A stranger had tried to steal my identity and nearly succeeded. I'd been humiliated, grief-stricken, and almost financially ruined. And I was still here. Still standing. Still painting. Still dreaming about climbing mountains. If I could survive all that, I could survive anything. I turned off the studio light and headed upstairs, past the wall where I'd hung my favorite quote from Maya Angelou, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." I told my story now. In court, when I testified against Rebecca. In my paintings, where I transformed my pain into art. In late-night conversations with my sister, where I'd finally admitted that my marriage hadn't been perfect, that I'd been unhappy long before Rebecca came along. And in choosing to stay in this house, to reclaim this life, to refuse to let someone else's betrayal define my future, I'd told the most important story of all. The story of a woman who thought she was broken but discovered she was just bent. The story of a wife who became a widow who became herself. The story of Elena Chen, survivor, artist, mountain climber, woman who takes up exactly as much space as she deserves. Which, it turns out, is quite a lot. 3 months later, I was standing on the summit of Mount Washington, my lungs burning from the thin air and my legs shaking from the climb, but my heart fuller than it had been in years. The hiking group I'd joined had become like family to me, 8 middle-aged people who'd all been through their own versions of hell and had decided to literally climb their way out of it. "How do you feel, Elena?" asked Mike, our group leader, a retired teacher who'd started hiking after his wife died of cancer. I looked out at the view, miles and miles of New Hampshire mountains stretching to the horizon, painted in every shade of green and gold imaginable. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't immediately try to smooth it down. "I feel alive," I said, and meant it. That night, back at the lodge where our group was staying, I called Sarah from my room. "I did it," I said as soon as she picked up. "I climbed a freaking mountain." "Elena, how was it? Are you okay? You sound different." "I sound different because I am different. Sarah, I spent 15 years making myself smaller, quieter, less ambitious so David wouldn't feel threatened. And today I climbed 6,288 feet above sea level because I wanted to see what was up there." "And what was up there?" "Me. The real me. The me I was before I learned to apologize for taking up space." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you, you know that? Not just for the mountain. For everything. For surviving Rebecca's insanity, for rebuilding your life, for becoming this person." "The funny thing is," I said, settling into the worn armchair by the window, "I don't think I became someone new. I think I just remembered who I was before I got married. Before I learned to define myself as half of a couple." That night, I dreamed about David. Not the David who betrayed me, or the David who'd been murdered by his mistress, but the David the first fallen in love with at 25. We were hiking together, young and carefree, and he was proud of me for keeping up with him on the trail. When I woke up, I wasn't sad. I was grateful. Grateful that I'd loved him, grateful that he'd loved me, and grateful that our story, complicated and painful as it became, had led me to this moment. To this mountain. To this version of myself. 6 months after the hiking trip, my art was featured in a real gallery in Boston. Not the community center where I'd had my first tentative showing, but an actual gallery with white walls and track lighting and wine at the opening reception. The collection was called After the Storm, and it chronicled my journey from David's death through Rebecca's trial to my newfound independence. There were 23 pieces in total, ranging from dark, angry paintings of betrayal to bright, hopeful landscapes of mountain peaks and sunrise skies. The centerpiece was a triptych I'd been working on for months. The 3 panels showed the same woman, me, at different stages of her life. In the first panel, she was young and eager, holding hands with a man who was looking away from her. In the second, she was older, standing alone but hunched over, diminished. In the third, she stood tall and proud, arms outstretched toward a sunrise, with mountains in the background. I titled it Before, During, and After. The gallery was packed for the opening. Sarah came, of course, and Marcus, David's brother, who'd become an unexpected source of support over the past year. Harold Williams came with his wife Margaret, and even some of my former colleagues from the accounting firm. But the person who surprised me most was Patricia, my first art teacher from the community college. She stood in front of the triptych for a long time, just studying it. "You remember what I told you that first day?" she asked when I joined her. "That I had good instincts but needed to trust myself more. Look at this." She gestured toward the paintings surrounding us. "This is what happens when someone finally learns to trust themselves completely. This is fearless art, Elena. This is the work of someone who's not afraid to tell the truth." As the evening went on, people approached me with questions about the paintings, about my story, about my process. I found myself telling the truth in ways I'd never been able to before. About my marriage's problems that predated Rebecca. About my own complicity in becoming smaller than I was meant to be. About the strange gift that trauma can be if you're willing to unwrap it carefully. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, spent a long time looking at a painting I'd done of my empty house after I'd first moved back in. It showed my kitchen table with one chair pulled out, one coffee mug, one place setting. I'd called it Table for One. "This painting," she said when she finally approached me, "it makes me feel less alone. I just went through a divorce, and I keep thinking there's something wrong with me for being relieved that I don't have to cook for 2 anymore." "There's nothing wrong with you," I told her. "Sometimes the hardest part of being in the wrong relationship isn't the loneliness you feel with someone else. It's remembering what it feels like to be alone with yourself and actually enjoy the company." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Can I ask you something? Do you ever regret staying married as long as you did?" I thought about that question for a long moment. It was something I'd been asking myself for months. "No," I said finally. "Because if I'd left David earlier, I would have left as someone who thought she wasn't enough. I would have carried that belief into whatever came next. By staying, by surviving everything that happened, I learned that I am enough. More than enough. And that knowledge, that confidence, it's worth 15 years of struggle." The young woman nodded and moved on, but her question stayed with me for the rest of the evening. Later, after the gallery had closed and I was helping pack up the leftover wine and cheese, the gallery owner, a sophisticated woman named Carmen, approached me. "Elena, I have a proposition for you. I know this was billed as a one-woman show, but the response tonight has been incredible. I've already sold 6 pieces, and I have 3 collectors asking about commissioning work." My heart skipped. "Really? Really? But more than that, I want to talk to you about teaching. I run workshops here for emerging artists, and I think you have something important to share. Not just about technique, but about finding your voice after trauma. About art as healing." Teaching. I'd never considered it, but the idea excited me in a way I hadn't expected. "I don't have formal credentials," I said. "I'm basically self-taught. The best teachers usually are. They're the ones who remember what it's like to struggle, to doubt themselves, to think they don't belong in the art world. You could help other people find their voices the way you found yours." I thought about that young woman at the gallery, about her relief at not having to cook for 2. About the hiking group where we all shared our stories of loss and recovery. About the transformative power of having someone witness your struggle and say, "Yes, that's real. Yes, that matters." "I'm interested," I said. "Very interested." 6 months later, I was standing in front of my first class at Carmen's Gallery. 8 women, ranging in age from 25 to 63, all of whom had signed up for Art is Healing, Finding Your Voice After Life Changes. Welcome, I said, looking around at their faces, some eager, some skeptical, all of them carrying stories I couldn't yet imagine. My name is Elena Chen, and 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. My husband had been having an affair, his mistress tried to steal my identity and inheritance, and I discovered that the man I'd been married to for 15 years had been murdered by the woman he was cheating with. A few gasps, some wide eyes. I'd learned that starting with the dramatic truth got people's attention quickly. But here's what I want you to understand from the beginning, I continued. This isn't a class about overcoming trauma. This is a class about discovering who you were always meant to be, underneath whatever circumstances have been defining you. Trauma doesn't create strength, it reveals strength that was already there. I moved to the easel I'd set up at the front of the room. We're going to start with self-portraits, but not the kind you might expect. I want you to paint yourself not as you are today, but as you were at a moment when you felt most authentically yourself. It might be when you were 5 years old, or 15, or 50. It might be yesterday if yesterday was a good day. The only requirement is that it has to be a moment when you felt like the truest version of yourself. One woman, probably in her 40s, raised her hand tentatively. What if I can't remember a time like that? Then we'll help you remember, I said. That's what we're here for. Over the next 12 weeks, I watched these women who'd survived divorce, death, illness, job loss, empty nest syndrome, identity crises of every imaginable variety, slowly uncover parts of themselves they'd forgotten existed. There was Margaret, 63, who'd been a wife and mother for so long she'd forgotten she'd once dreamed of being a photographer. Her paintings were all about light and shadow, about the beauty she'd been noticing but not naming for decades. There was Jasmine, 28, who'd left an abusive marriage and was learning to take up space again. Her canvases were bold and bright, full of movement and energy that seemed to vibrate off the walls. There was Linda, 55, whose youngest child had just left for college, leaving her alone in a house that suddenly felt enormous. She painted rooms, empty rooms, full rooms, rooms in transition, each one a meditation on space and solitude and possibility. Watching them discover their voices reminded me of my own journey. The tentative first brush strokes. The frustration when the painting didn't match the vision in your head. The moment when you stopped trying to paint what you thought you should paint and started painting what you actually felt. Art isn't about being good, I told them during our final class. It's about being honest. It's about putting something true into the world, even if it's messy or imperfect or completely different from what anyone else would create. After that first session of classes ended, Carmen asked me to develop a more advanced workshop. Then a local community center asked me to teach there. Then a women's shelter reached out, wanting to offer art therapy for their residents. 2 years after David's death, I had accidentally become someone with expertise in helping people rebuild their lives through creative expression. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it was what I'd been called to do. I was teaching 3 different workshops now, plus doing private coaching for artists who wanted to develop their voices. My calendar was fuller than it had ever been when I was married, but it was full of things I'd chosen. Things that energized me instead of draining me. On the 2nd anniversary of David's death, I drove to the cemetery where he was buried. I'd only been there once before, for the funeral, and I'd been too numb and confused then to really process anything. His headstone was simple, David Michael Chen, beloved husband and son. The words felt strange to me now. Beloved husband. Had I beloved him at the end? Had he beloved me? I sat down on the grass next to his grave and pulled out a letter I'd written. Dear David, I read aloud, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to a headstone. It's been 2 years since you died, and I wanted to give you an update on how things turned out. Rebecca is in prison, as you probably know if dead people get news updates. She's serving life without parole for your murder, plus additional time for fraud and identity theft. I testified at her trial, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most satisfying days of my life. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I got to tell the truth about what she did to both of us. I know you tried to end things with her before she killed you. I know you realized your mistake and wanted to come home to me. Part of me wishes you'd had the chance to try. Part of me is glad I never had to decide whether to take you back. I've been painting, David. Really painting, not just taking classes. I have a gallery that represents my work now, and I teach other women how to find their voices through art. Remember how you used to tease me about my little hobby when I'd sketch in my notebook at the kitchen table? It turns out my little hobby was actually my calling. I climbed Mount Washington last year. And Mount Monadnock. And next month I'm going to Colorado to try some real mountains. I know that probably surprises you. I surprised myself. I'm dating someone. His name is Robert, and he's a widower too. We met in my hiking group. He's nothing like you, he's quiet where you were boisterous, steady where you were impulsive. He reads poetry and grows vegetables and thinks my art is the most important thing I've ever done. We're taking it slow, but David, I think you'd like him. More importantly, I like who I am when I'm with him. I'm not writing this letter to hurt you or to prove anything. I'm writing it because I needed to tell you that I forgive you. Not just for the affair, but for all the ways we failed each other over the years. For the ways we let our marriage become comfortable instead of connected. For the ways we both stopped trying to grow. I also needed to thank you. Your death, as horrible as it was, set me free in ways I never could have imagined. It forced me to discover who Elena Chen was when she wasn't half of a couple. And it turns out, she's pretty amazing. I hope you're at peace, David. I hope wherever you are, you're not carrying the guilt and confusion that weighed you down in your final years. I hope you can see that your death wasn't meaningless, it became the beginning of something beautiful for me. I'll always love the best parts of you. The man who danced with me in our kitchen. The man who held my hand during my father's funeral. The man who believed in my dreams even when I'd forgotten them myself. Rest well, my first love. Thank you for the good years, and thank you for letting me go when it was time. Love always. Elena. I folded the letter and tucked it under a small stone by his headstone. Then I sat there for a while, watching the sun set behind the trees, feeling something I'd never expected to feel in a cemetery. Gratitude. Not for David's death, but for the life it had made possible. For the woman I'd become because I'd had to become her. For the art I'd created, the people I'd helped, the mountains I'd climbed, the love I'd found, all of it built on the foundation of loss transformed into strength. When I finally stood to leave, I realized I wasn't crying. I was smiling. 2 years ago, I thought losing David was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong about that, just like I'd been wrong about so many things. The worst thing that could happen to me would have been staying married to someone who didn't value me, teaching classes at the community college that bored me to tears, living a small, safe, predictable life because I was too afraid to want more. The worst thing would have been never discovering that I was capable of surviving betrayal, forging my own path, and creating something beautiful from the wreckage of my old life. The worst thing would have been never learning that sometimes the most painful endings are actually the most necessary beginnings. As I walked back to my car, I thought about the workshop I was teaching tomorrow. 8 new women, 8 new stories, 8 opportunities to help someone else discover their own strength. I thought about the painting I was working on, a landscape of the Colorado mountains I'd be climbing next month, painted not from a photograph but from imagination and hope. I thought about Robert, who would be making dinner at his house where I'd probably spend the night, where we'd talk about books and plans and dreams until well past midnight. I thought about the life I'd built from scratch after everything I thought I knew about myself had been stripped away. At 45 years old, I was finally living instead of just existing. I was Elena Chen, artist, teacher, mountain climber, woman who'd learned that the most beautiful views come after the most difficult climbs. And I was just getting started. The story people tell about me now is that I'm the woman who survived her husband's murder and his mistress's schemes and came out stronger on the other side. But that's not really my story. My story is that I'm the woman who spent 42 years thinking she wasn't enough and then discovered she was everything she'd ever needed to be. The rest was just details.